Welcome to The Hook with Sarah Larson. I'm your host, Sarah Larson, and I have an extra special guest today, my friend Jenni Sills with Life Simply Balanced. She is a certified nutritionist and has some other things that she specializes in, and we're going to find out a little bit more about that. Jenni, would you like to give us a brief introduction of what it is that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I am so honored that I get to chat with you today. I actually met Sarah through a mutual friend, and it's so fun because I feel like I know her, but we've never met in person. It's one of those friendships that's just like, I can't wait to like meet you in person and give you a big squeeze. So, I look forward to
Amen.
that day. I am a certified nutrition coach. I take the mixture of my background in education. I was a teacher for 12 years. I have 3 degrees, so I'm like a teacher by degree. And I take what I've learned in terms of teaching and education and coaching, and now I get to help people make healthier choices, live a balanced lifestyle. That's where my business comes from. I've spent many years, which I'm sure we're going to dive into, of my life trying to do an all or nothing, trying to have it all perfect, which there is no such thing. And once I let go of that, I learned that there are so many other women out there who are not starting to make healthier choices or are refusing to like give something a try because it has to be perfect. It has to be just right. And I was one of those. And so almost like I'm a recovering all or nothing addict and our recovering perfectionist. And so I get to help women who have experienced similar life stories. Even if they look very different, we have the same mindset or the same stories running on repeat. I get to help them feel like a human, feel normal, and then also make change through whatever it is they're going through because life never stops. There's never a perfect time. And so whatever someone's walking through, I kind of, as Ross would say, I help you pivot, that's my goal. Yeah.
Well, I love what you say about everybody has similar stories. We all have life experience. The recovering perfectionist, I think, is often something that business owners go through or
Yes.
feel. You can't have a business and be perfection every day.
Nope.
We do the best we can
That's
and
right.
then move on.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a little bit and find out about Jenni's early life. Where did you grow up? What you have siblings, parents? Tell us that story.
Yeah. So I grew up in Salem, Oregon, not the witches. Everyone's like, Salem, Massachusetts. Oregon Trail, people, the Oregon Trail. And my parents divorced when I was really young. I'm like 5. Both parents got remarried and definitely was like back and forth every 2 weeks. So talk about just learning to deal with change all the time. And my parents had similar what they would call like rules or expectations. The vibes in the house were very different. And so it was every 2 weeks, just a complete change in my life. It was a disruption. And I think I handled it very well in some ways. Like I was a straight A student. I loved school. It's probably why I went to teaching. I loved helping and coaching and learning. And things really came fairly easy for me, partly because I knew that there was this not a bad expectation. There wasn't pressure to do well. It was just I was a natural learner, very curious, and I had the environment at home to like help me want to succeed. There wasn't like a you have to do this, but it just came natural to me. So it wasn't until probably college when I started actually seeing like not getting the things that I set out to go for and then learning how to deal with that. Um I loved my childhood. I think about my childhood friends and all of those experiences. But as an adult, when I look back, I see so much of the interruptions and the things that I probably just ignored and I thought they were normal. This is just how life was. And I look back now as a nutrition coach and I also see how much food shame, how much guilt, how much pressure, that perfectionistic tendency, where that stemmed from. And it wasn't necessarily my family, but it was like everywhere in the media, everything that I saw. And so I kind of see, like, looking back, the tapestry that was created of my life, and not all of it was as picture perfect as I thought it was.
Isn't it interesting how we can see, obviously, hindsight, as they
Right.
say, 2020, and we are much wiser now than we were at that age. So looking back, it's easy to say, ah, now I see the
Yeah.
light. But I know exactly what you're talking about as far as the shaming around food. And um, I know that one thing in particular in my household was you eat what's on your plate, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And that is certainly something that has been an ongoing thing. And it always surprised me when I saw my friends as parents kind of allowing their kids to eat, okay, just have a couple of bites. And I would think, "Ah, they need to eat everything. What are you doing?" And then, many years later, of course, I recognize, like, oh, they're not making their kid feel bad about food.
Right.
Maybe
Absolutely.
that's a better way to handle it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think for me too, when I look back, not really knowing how I fit in because I developed early. Like I just hit puberty in fifth grade, like had boobs
Yeah.
before I knew what to do with them. I was like, ugh. Like I was just so uncomfortable in my body. I was what I thought was chubby, for my age, and everyone else was still a stick because they hadn't hit puberty. And this happened for a few years. Now I know, like, insulin resistance runs in my family. I now I know how to eat for my body type, but no one was even talking about it in the 80s and 90s. Like
Yeah.
eating for your body type, like what is that? Um, and so I ate the food I was given. It was very nourishing food for the most part. There were Pop Tarts and, like all those things too, but it was looking at the friends I had and then the people I saw on TV and thinking, I don't look like that. And I started to tell myself stories. And then I also had, some very negative influences who also verbally told me things that were negative about myself. Well, I'm sure there were so many great things said to me about the way I looked, but I could only hear those. And those were the stories that repeated. And so as I moved into college and things weren't maybe like happening as easily for me, then I turned to food for comfort or attention from boys for comfort, things like that, where they weren't necessarily healthy habits, but it was what I had. It was what, I could cling to. And I even learned, like, found a passion for cooking, but it wasn't necessarily the healthiest food, and I was eating a lot more of it than I should have. And I've never been overweight, and everyone has their own journey, but I was uncomfortable and I knew I wasn't making healthy choices for myself. And I tell anybody, whether you can be very thin and be unhealthy, just like you can be very overweight and unhealthy. And so I've seen, being a little bit overweight and being too thin and being unhealthy. And to me, it really goes to like how we think about ourselves and then how we treat ourselves with the things we think, the food we put into our body, how we talk to ourselves. So it's been very interesting to like see all of that come together for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the stories that we tell ourselves, listening to you talk about how you developed early and
Hmm.
started puberty early, I remember friends that had that. Now, I was on the other end of the spectrum. I didn't get my period until I was like seventh or eighth grade, very flat chested young girl.
Right.
And felt the same stories happening. Like, oh, I
Right.
remember, seeing my friend who developed in fifth grade and was the first one to have boobs and all of those
Right.
kinds of things, and how she was perceived by other kids. Also, then looking at other girls that were developing and going, oh, well, I don't look like that either. I was, looking back, it kind of, I want to shake, young me, because I was a super thin kid, up through into my early 20s. And even in my late teens, was eating Big Macs practically every day and,
Mhm.
just fine.
Right.
But somewhere in my 20s, those stories went the opposite direction, and I started really fighting to keep that more desirable weight, let's say, what you saw on TV and that kind of
Right.
thing. And I have really struggled with that ever since. So
Yeah.
it's really, it is truly about the stories that we tell ourselves. And I have been spending several years now working through these things. There is still not perfection.
Right.
Again, recovering perfectionist. I've done some very unhealthy things to get thinner
Right.
and, have that perceived perfection.
Right.
So we just keep learning.
Right. Well, isn't it interesting though how like we have exact opposite experiences, but the same stories too? We were like, I wish I could be like fill in the blank. So I think
Yeah,
that's one of the trends I see with my clients is it's this perception of how they think people view them or how they view themselves like prior to kids or prior to an injury or a season of life, right? Disruption, change. Well, if I could just go back to that, then all would be good. But that's in the past. And that's not what we're dealing with right now. And so that's also what I try to help people do is like, where are we at right now? What are the obstacles we have right now? What are we facing right now? Because how things were in the past, that's the past. It's never going to be just like that again. And most likely, if we're evolving and growing as we should as humans, it should never be like it was at that one time.
right.
We should always be getting better. And I like the word better. There's no perfect, there's no good, there's no bad. It's like better. Um, I think it's just so intriguing how the more conversations I have with women, the more it's that we may have opposite experiences too.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we're dealing with the same pain, the
Hmm.
same doubts and fears. And we wouldn't know that unless we took a chance to be vulnerable or finally like be open to change.
Now, you have mentioned disruption a couple of times, and that's one of my favorite words and
Yep.
one of my favorite subjects, really. I'm very curious about how our lives get disrupted and how we handle those things and what happens to our identities and our resiliency
Mm-hmm.
after a perceived disruption. You mentioned that your parents divorced when you were young,
Mm-hmm.
but it sounds like that even though that was a challenge, you managed through that pretty well. What other disruptions do you feel like you have faced
Mm.
since then?
I mean, there are many. I'm going to try and limit it to a few. We don't have all day. But I would say the first one, so I always knew when I was younger I wanted to be a teacher. My stepmom, my uncle, my cousin, and my stepsister, all teachers. So it ran in the family on both sides. And I just naturally came to me, my nurturing just personality. So I taught for 12 years, but about year 7, I moved back from teaching overseas. And that was a really rough experience for me. Nothing like they said it would be at all. And so I came back really bitter in the profession, but that was all I knew. I had 2 degrees at that point, and I went and got a third certification, like nationally board certified. This is what all the other teachers in my district were doing. And I was like, cool, it's a bonus. Like, I guess I should do this. And the more I went further and further into that world of education, the more bitter and just kind of resentful I became because it wasn't aligning with what I wanted anymore. And that was really hard for me to come to grips with because I had spent money and years of education. And I was like, what else can you do? Like, I have these degrees. I don't have a business degree. And I was working out a lot at this studio, and I'm not athletically inclined. Like, I trip over my own feet. But I started to realize I really loved the class and I am a teacher, so I could teach that. And so while I was like in the last 2 years of my teaching, I actually became an instructor for this fitness studio. And I loved getting up at 4 a.m. every morning, not every morning, but like 3 times a week to go teach 1 hour before I would go teach middle schoolers. Whole other nightmare. But I lived 5 minutes from my work and I couldn't get myself to work on time doing something that I had all these certifications to do. And so that was finally when I was like, okay, I need to figure out something else. And so I really thought I had researched everything well. again, hindsight, knew nothing about business, should have done a little bit more research there. Just a little heads up, just of like how to start one. But what I will say is that I took a leap of faith because I realized I was done waiting for Mr. Right to come along to like save me from a profession I didn't like. And I knew I didn't want any kids to go through my classroom seeing a teacher who didn't want to be there. Because I've had professors and teachers who didn't want to be there, and that's not an experience I wanted to give. So even though my parents were not thrilled because I was taking this leap of faith, I moved states because I had a friend there. Seattle was so expensive, I couldn't afford to live there. Moved to San Antonio, Texas, and I started out as a personal trainer. I got certified and thought, okay, I can do this. Again, this is after like 4 or 5 plans that I thought were going to happen didn't happen. So ended up in a head coach position a couple years later at a different fitness studio and thought, this is awesome. I've made it. I'm the head coach. I've got a team of coaches that are working with me. And it was a nightmare. It was what I thought I wanted, but again, it was in the wrong circumstances, working for the wrong person. And I really became someone I didn't like. I mean, I think, well, I hope not everyone can relate to that, but maybe a few listeners can, where I look back and it's no regret. It's just learning. But it took a lot of humbleness to finally learn I was working myself into the ground. I had to step down. And then 2020 happened. And so I almost was given this space to kind of navigate through rough waters of like, okay, I'm not coaching anymore. And still do work for this network marketing company, but not as my full time. And again, people were feeding me, just do this full time, but it never aligned with what I wanted. I liked the products. I still do. I like the company, but I didn't want to do it full time. And so eventually I decided I've had my own nutrition journey. I'm passionate about helping people. I should be a nutrition coach. I told my now husband that when we first started dating, because he's a nutrition coach. And I was like, I want to like do what you're doing, but someday I can't do it right now. And it was because I didn't trust myself enough. And so through all of those disruptions of things not landing right, learning that I wasn't being the best version of myself and having to own it and make changes, like I had to work through some of those not so great moments in life, but it's made me a stronger leader. It's made me understand business better and really to listen to my gut, what I know that I want. Every time I look back and I've listened to someone else's advice and it was out of desperation that I went with it, nightmare, train wreck. Every time, even though it was scary, that I listened to my gut and I did the scary thing, even though like I really didn't know how to start my own nutrition business a year ago. I didn't have all these leads to like bring in income, but I had the security that my husband had a job that took care of us. And I was still working, doing some other things. But I was like, enough is enough. And I want to do what I know I am meant to do, which is combine my passion for education and teaching and all that I've learned through nutrition, including getting certified, like getting the actual like degree, if you will,
Yeah.
so I can help people. And my mother-in-law was asking me like, what do you love most about what you do? And I said, it's helping people. It's talking to my clients. It's helping them see and make changes. So the business side of things, still not my favorite aspect of what I do. Like someday I will hire someone to do most of it, if I'm being honest,
Right.
so that I can do what I love to do. All of those disruptions have led me to this sweet spot. And I will say one more thing, and it's one I've been working through recently, is I work from home.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm 40 and we do not have kids. And it's something we've been trying for the last 16 months. And there has been a story in my head that I've had to work through that says, I am not allowed to work from home because I'm not a mom. So I don't have kids to take care of. So therefore, who am I to like just work from home and have the leisure to go for a 2 hour walk with a friend if I want to. That has been a story I've had to work through that like has popped up. That brings me to tears because it's like, who am I? I'm a coach. I'm an awesome, phenomenal coach. And it takes time to grow a business. And now I'm going on my soapbox, but it was all of those disruptions that I like led me to even feel that and recognize that story, that untruth was going on deep inside of me, that like I felt like I'm not worthy of running my own business because I'm staying home and I don't have any kids to take care of.
Wow.
Got heavy real fast.
Oh man, that hit me in the feels. Yeah, I get that. And what I was thinking as you were telling the story in general of how you got to where you are and how you started and got your certification in coaching, what my question was going to be was, well, how did that affect your identity? Because that's a disruption of a different sort. It's the kind
Yep.
that puts you into alignment. But you sort of told the story of
Yeah.
how even a good disruption
Mm-hmm.
can cause an identity crisis.
Right.
Or I guess I would call it an identity crisis when you think of
Mm-hmm.
the story that you're telling yourself is that you're not
Right.
worthy of working from home and having a business that allows you the flexibility that somebody who has kids should have. We would love for all of our parents out there to have the
Right.
flexibility in their lives to take care of their kids and earn an income at the same time. And it's
Right.
certainly possible. We know that, especially given the online economy that is booming right now, and we're part of that. So we know that it's possible. I know that you've been trying to have children. So for me, I don't have children either, but I have worked from home on and off over the years. And so that's always kind of been part of my identity is that I work from home.
Part of that story that I've been telling myself, it needed to come out and come to the surface. I think so often, like my clients all the time, they resist certain changes. Maybe not all changes, but there's something like, no, I'm not ready to go there. Whether it's like, I have a client right now who knows she just needs to get better sleep and that the ripple effect would really start to show up in a really positive way for her overall health. But she's like, my whole family is a family of poor sleepers and not prioritizing their health and their sleep.
Mhm.
And so she's dealing with setting boundaries for herself and recognizing that she knows what she needs to do, but it's painful because it's hard to be the first one. It's hard to be the first one to take that step, to be that role model. And it's hard to walk through the things that we don't want to admit that maybe we think about ourselves. Like, I had a client say, I didn't want to lose weight for the longest time because if I did, and then I started dating again and they didn't want me, now I can't say it's because I'm overweight. And I
Yeah.
think so many women carry these deep stories of pain that we're not willing to go through yet. And so we just kind of push it down. Because that disruption of working through it, of just acknowledging, I can't believe I was thinking that.
Yeah.
Like, because when you say it out loud, sometimes you're like, well, that's dumb. When I see the change in my clients, when I see their success stories, like in their words, not just along the way,
Mhm.
it's worth every single bit of it. But when I'm at home and I'm like, okay, I've done my work for the day. Now what? That's when I have to fight through those stories. I was in Jamaica recently and we went running one morning and the pavement took me out. It was very uneven and I fell and like my hand broke the fall. And I went into immediate shock because my whole body weight went down on that. And it was so weird because, I mean, we're right now in the midst of our fertility journey and it's been hard, I mean, to say the least. And all day I was just weeping at the pool. I was like, thank God I have my sunglasses on. There's like party music blaring in the background, and I'm just like wiping back the tears. But it shook me up.
Mhm.
And then unfortunately, I did have like a pretty big panic attack, like anxiety attack that night. It was 16 months worth of repressed feelings that I thought I had been dealing with. And they like finally came out. And the next day, I mean, I felt so good. I felt so much better, more clear. And I think sometimes we think disruption is all negative,
Right.
but sometimes we do have to walk through the hard things so that we can finally move past it, become healed, to
Yes.
feel whole. It was just that like really needed process. Sometimes it's painful thinking of people who maybe lost a job and then they're like, now what? It's like you have an opportunity. And it's always about how we choose to look at something, it's how we reframe a situation. And I'll tell you, sometimes I don't want to be positive about a crappy situation.
Right.
It's also okay, I think, to feel the feels, be pissed, think it's unfair. Like, man, my body bounced back after kid number one. Why can't it bounce back after kid number two? This sucks. Or even like how you and I, as young teens, looked at our bodies in the
Yeah.
same way with like complete opposite outcomes. It's like, okay, feel it, experience it, but move on.
Right.
You got to move on.
Exactly. Throw that pity party,
Yeah.
and then you have to put on your big girl pants and move
Yeah.
on. Such good insight, Jenny. I loved the the idea of reframing, and that is really what we have to do is move past that negative. It's so interesting how your fall it sort of shook you up. I know there's a physiological thing that dogs do, right? They shake to sort of
Mhm.
release
Yes,
anxiety.
anxiety.
Maybe
Yeah,
that fall shook you like that and allowed you to release that
absolutely.
anxiety that you've been feeling. What an amazing breakthrough, especially knowing that you felt better about it the next day.
And I could even see some physiological changes in my body too, in terms of inflammation that my body was holding on to. People don't realize like inflammation, we store stress in our body, and
Mhm.
hormones like cortisol is just going to tell your body it's not safe. So instead of like so many women who they come to me because like I can't lose weight, and they think we're going to deal with nutrition. In reality, we deal with lifestyle, stress,
Yeah.
letting go of control, sleep habits, mindset. And once they're willing to work through that, that's when the weight starts to fall off because their body no longer feels like it's protecting them. And that's what a lot of our hormones do. Think about back in the ice age when you had to have that quick adrenaline rush if there was danger. Our body still will do that for us, it will still protect us. And, talk about disruption. All I've learned about my hormones from my own fertility journey, I've done so much research. Well, now I get to help other women. I've created courses on it, I've done live workshops, and I'm now drawing in women who are struggling with hormone imbalances. I am 40 and going through perimenopause, which is early and I have been for a few years. And so people are hearing my story and going, okay, I can relate to her because she knows what a hot flash feels like. She knows what it's like to try everything and still feel like your body is just holding on to fat. She's lived it, she's experienced it, and she's gotten positive changes. So I've been able to niche down and like help
Yeah.
women who are struggling with hormones because not only have I experienced it, but I have my own coaches that I'm working with and I'm getting my own education on it and I'm continuing to expand. So as much as it's been hard to walk through it, it's a really positive disruption because I can help others who are going through the same thing.
Love it. Definitely, our experiences are what inform how we can teach and what we can share.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you are using your own journey to then turn around and help other women.
I just think the one thing that keeps coming back to me is that there's never a right time to start, right?
Mhm.
In fact, if people are hesitant to start, even just a discovery call, like to figure out, I always tell people, like, I'm not going to be a good fit with everyone as a coach, but just as as a business coach, like it's an interview process,
Yeah.
but you don't know until you ask the questions, until you push the boundaries. I say if it's scary because you're like, this doesn't seem reasonable. They're promising me to lose 10 pounds in 3 weeks. Trust your gut with that. That's not how I run my business. But if it's scary because you might have to address some deeper level pain points or some things that you haven't been wanting to address, that's when you know it's time to make a change. Like that's how I knew that my nutrition business, this is what I'm doing, because I knew I had the knowledge. I knew that I had to learn, and that there are a lot of people who knew a lot more than me. So what does that cause me to do? Go out there and learn more. Keep
Yeah.
learning, keep learning. If it feels scary because you've never done it before, it might be time to make that change, whether it's a business, whether it's a healthy health and wellness journey, whether it's leaving a relationship or a friendship. There's a lot of things, but there's never a right time. And so
Yeah.
if you feel that like, oh, this is going to be hard, then you should do it.
I love that advice. I definitely feel like that is something that applies to, yes, all of life. One of the things that I like to preach in my coaching business is action is what brings clarity, and it can be the uncomfortable action. If you're scared of it, if it's scary, it's probably something that you should do. One of the things I wanted to ask you that you mentioned earlier was you had been teaching overseas. So just really quick, what took you there? Where were you? What was that experience that was so bad?
Well, so I moved to Hong Kong. I had been looking for a year to teach overseas because I love travel.
Yeah.
And I had taught for 5 years and was kind of getting that boredom. Do I go back to teach kindergarten? Do I teach another grade? Last minute, like 3 weeks before the school year started, got a job offer in Hong Kong. I knew nothing about Hong Kong. I was like, is it in China? Literally had no clue. Said no at first, but I was single. I didn't have a car payment. I didn't have a mortgage. All the ducks were lining up.
Yeah.
And I had some teacher friends who were married at the time, and they were like, you're 27. This is ridiculous. Get over there. So I called back. I'm like, can I have that job? They said it was one thing, and the school was completely opposite of what they claimed it to be. It was more an alternative school. So kids had more like severe behavioral disorders, and I'm not trained for that. So it was a learn as you go kind of situation. And the school was also in denial of what they were. So there was a lot of aspects, but I traveled, I think like 20 countries in the 2 years that I lived over there, and a lot of life learning experiences, but it was so much fun. And I work on not having regrets, just either lessons or memories. It was a hoot for 2 years. It was definitely a different life experience.
Wow. Sounds like living in the fire for sure. But hey, if that doesn't teach you how to handle things, I don't know what will. Where can we find you online?
Well, so first of all, Instagram, life simply balanced _ between life and balanced and simply. That's one place you can find me. And then I put a labor of love into my website. So all of my coaching programs are on there. I have a weekly blog. And so if you want to just get some weekly advice on nutrition, mindset, lifestyle, sleep, recipes, all those things, go to jennisills.com, Jenni with an I. And I think you'll put it in the show notes, but you can just sign up to get my newsletter, and it comes out once a week, and it's called Food for Thought. So I give advice. I have guest bloggers, lots of things in terms of having a simply balanced lifestyle. Depending on whenever you're listening to this, I may have new programs up and running, but I'm always taking coaching applications. So if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can contact me there. And I have a freebies page. So it changes based off of the season, but it's jennisills.com/freebies. Pretty easy to remember, but you can grab some free resources and get some really good information there.
I will put all those things in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this conversation today, Jenni. I have really enjoyed it. I love that even when I know somebody, I'm always learning new things. And so that's the joy of having these conversations as well.
That's right, friend. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much, and have a great week.